Back again for another BAS podcast episode. We fresh off the first Democratic debates for the 2020 presidential campaign. You know, I was real curious to know what was going to be discussed tonight and what wasn't going to be discussed tonight. So, got a chance to check that out, and now we're ready to talk about that through the lens of BAS, Black American Sovereignty.
Yes, I watched as well. The presidential debates, the Democratic primary has begun. The process has begun. I'm very excited to talk about how I feel, about what I saw and what I heard. And so let's get right into it. I would like to start by once again emphasizing a major point, and that is I have a political opinion. But at this time, my political opinion does not matter. I'm sure that all of you have a political opinion. And I would say once again to you as well, your political opinion as it regards to Black American sovereignty or reparations or the Black experience, the Black struggle in America, however you want to categorize it, as it relates to this topic, your political opinion shouldn't matter as well. This topic is separate. And I'm bringing that up because in the last week, we had a congressional committee looking at a bill that would study reparations, the cause for it, the purpose for it, etc. I think it's fair to say that this bill is being promoted predominantly by the Democrat Party. And it's being opposed from a political aspect predominantly by the Republican Party. And why that's relevant is because this is not a Republican problem. This is not a Democrat problem. It's an American problem. And even more specifically, it is a direct problem of Black Americans. And so let's take it from there. What did you think about what you saw, if there is anything to speak of at all from the first round of Democratic primaries in terms of the Black experience or reparations or Black American sovereignty, which obviously no one really knows anything about yet? What did you see from that?
Well, this is what I saw. I saw what I already felt in my heart, which is that the Black experience, Black citizens, Black Americans are on the far back burner in political society. African Americans, Black people, Black Americans were mentioned barely. Issues, Black American issues, some of which I would, there was discussion of economic equality, never specifically for Black Americans. There was discussion of gun violence and how those things affect Black Americans. I think healthcare rights and abortion rights came up, and how Black women are affected by some of these policies. It was slightly brought up, but not to the extent of Hispanic or Latino Americans. Now, first off, let me just say, I don't have a problem with that. I just am a realist, and I feel like I say this realistically when I say the Democratic Party is fighting as hard as they possibly can to bring in more Hispanic Latino voters because, like myself, they're aware of the emerging, exploding, expanding population of Hispanic people of voting age and the future of Hispanics or Latinos, Latinx, I think they're more currently referred to. They know what the numbers are going to be projected out to be in the future. So I heard instances of candidates speaking in Spanish. I think it was Beto O'Rourke, if that's how you pronounce his name. He answered a question in Spanish. Hey, I find it great. Hey, that's linguistic equity, equality. But to me, it just made it more apparent this is clearly the vote that they are trying to attract into their party. And for black people, it's just more evidence that our political status, the issues that pertain to us are basically irrelevant. And that was supported, the thought, my thinking that we're politically irrelevant was supported, in my opinion, based on today's Democratic debate.
I took notice personally that the word reparations was not used one time in the 2 hours that words were exchanged at this Democratic primary event, at this debate. The moderators didn't use the word. None of the candidates used the word. I found that very interesting because it was only 6 days ago that this House Congressional board or group of congressmen had this event. I don't know how to categorize it. I think they're trying to pass a bill, HR 40, I think it is, where they would look into and investigate the need, if one at all, or the purposes behind, or the benefits, the pros, the cons of reparations for slavery. And I didn't hear the word used. It's been in the news. It's been in the news, and people have talked about it. It's been in articles, and I didn't hear the word used one time. I found that curious. I know Cory Booker for sure was at this meeting. I know for sure that he's on the committee that put that event together. He is a proponent for the investigation. As far as I know, that's as far as he's gone. And the word wasn't used. He spoke about on multiple occasions that he's basically still, in a predominantly black area, or that's the way I come to understand it. He talked about gun violence and how it personally affected him because people on his street had died this year. Talked about assault weapons and things of this nature. But the word was never used by anybody. And I found it curious. I thought for sure that somebody would say something about it, with as much as I've heard it being discussed in the news, and it wasn't. And it brought me to start reading some things. I'd like to share something that I found from the National Review, which I believe is a conservative publication. I believe it to be. I don't know for sure. I don't read the National Review, but I found this article, and it's by D. Roy Murdoch. And the article is called "Democrats Unleash the Cancer of Slavery Reparations." Okay, that's what the article is called. It's an opinion piece. I'm just going to read a paragraph. This paragraph is from the article. Our government, the United States government, vanquished the Confederacy and with it slavery. The U.S. government's Republican-led radical Reconstruction policy educated, integrated, enfranchised, and empowered former slaves, some of whom were elected to Congress. Alas, resurgent Democrats torpedoed that initiative in 1877. Okay, I want to pause there. The Civil War ended in 1865 or 1866. These Republicans passed this radical Reconstruction policy shortly after the war, but the Democrats were able to torpedo that within 10 years of the Civil War being over. Now, here's why I find this interesting, because if we look at everything that's happened to black people in the United States of America from the beginning of time in the country until 1877, there was a lot of things that happened, a lot of crimes that were committed against black people. And the party that was fighting for us, they would say, was able to accomplish a lot of things 10 years, within a 10-year window after the Civil War. But after that, they lost, and they abandoned the fight. Now, here's the question I want to ask. With all the crimes that happened to black people from the beginning of the country until 1877, would all those crimes be worse than the crime that was committed on September 11th? Okay, I think slavery was terrorism. I think it was terrorism from the government. I think it was terrorism from the citizens. I want to use the word terrorism. So there was a continued terrorism upon black people for a long time, over 100 years. Okay, lots of people died, lots of people were raped, lots of families were broken up, lots of things were stolen, lots of property was broken. Okay, the Twin Towers fell on September 11th in one day and 3,000 people died. Now in 2019, we're still fighting in Afghanistan. We're still fighting in Afghanistan. 2 soldiers died this week in Afghanistan. The Taliban took credit. We're still fighting that war 20 years later. But 10 years after the Civil War was over, the Democrats won. They were able to stop all the Republican efforts. Okay, my point is, it doesn't matter who's fighting with black people or against black people. We're the ones who continually wind up losing. For you to make a statement that you did all these things and there were actually blacks in Congress, and then alas, the Democrats torpedoed it in 1877, you didn't fight very hard. A hell of a lot less hard than you're fighting against this war on terrorism in which 3,000 people died in a single day, and we still got to fight. We still got to fight. We still got to go to war. We still got to have issues with Iran and people in Iraq and all this jazz going on. We don't got no problem fighting all kind of wars, except the wars that we should really be fighting, which is fixing the wrongs that were done to black people. What do you think about that statement?
I definitely agree with the argument that you're making. I think the problem lies here. You describe these as crimes being committed. I don't think that the general public nor the United States itself views the things that have been done to black people, black Americans, as crimes. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles. Because things have been molded, manipulated to be, why don't they take care of themselves, or why do they tear their communities up, etc. The economic discrimination, the housing discrimination, the public school discrimination, the criminal justice discrimination, none of these things are accepted in the mainstream world that we live in as actual crimes. So, that alone is problematic. Number two, the second thing I would like to bring up is, the point that you're making, it just speaks to the inconsistency that, the black experience is taken serious with. America as a country, private and public, we only seem to back or even think about black issues when it's, a hell of a fuss has to be made. Cats got to get sprayed down with fire hoses, and kids, shot with fire hoses and flown across the street. You got to have little kids locked up in jail. It takes a hell of a lot for the black experience to be listened to. So, what you're speaking to, it just says we're only taken serious once every couple 100 years for maybe 10 years or so. After slavery, we had about 10 years, civil rights, 60s, we had about a good 10, 15 years. I don't know when the next wave is happening. Maybe we're creating that right now.
I'd like to add by saying that I think, and I spoke about this last time, reparations, the way that it's being discussed right now, is not. It's a smoke screen. It's a smoke screen being used by these two political parties that fighting on against each other and disagreeing against each other on all these different topics. We're the ones who get stuck in the middle far too often, and in a more direct way than a lot of other Americans have throughout the history of this country. And now this topic is being used once again, in my opinion, as a political issue. The left wants to use it because they know they need black votes to win in this next election, which is very important to them. And the right will argue against it because it's another way for them to point out that the left is just trying to hand things out. Their argument would be, we're handing things out for something. Nobody was a slave. Okay, you're right. Nobody was a slave. But they're using this us and this topic as a tug of war to try to gain support with their own supporters. That's what it is. And if you want to be used by either political party in a losing effort to you, you go ahead. I want no part of it. I want no part of using Black American sovereignty as a political tool to curry favor with a particular political party over another. We're not a tool. We're not an instrument. We're human beings and we're Americans, and we have earned the right to govern ourselves, to have an opportunity to govern ourselves. That's what we're talking about. So I want to continue. This is from the same article. This is the next paragraph. The United States government integrated the armed forces in 1948. The U.S. Supreme Court judged school segregation unconstitutional in 1954. The U.S. government adopted the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which killed Jim Crow statutes across the South. The U.S. government's Voting Rights Act of 1965 guaranteed blacks access to ballot boxes in the South and beyond. The U.S. government's Great Society War on Poverty, racial preference programs, school desegregation decisions, education subsidies, public housing, food stamps, and much more were designed largely to help millions of blacks overcome more than a century of Democrat-enforced discrimination and destitution after slavery ended. Okay, a lot is said there. How do I hear that? Well, between 1865 and 1877, like the previous paragraph discussed, we made a lot of progress. Go back and look at that era. There was black congressmen and all these other things. But alas, the Democrats torpedoed it in 1877. So between 1877 and 1948, when we integrated the armed forces, now we were in the Army in the Civil War. And I'm sure they didn't kick all the black people out of the Army between 1877 and 1948. But they just desegregated it in 1948. So what does that mean? All the niggas were put in separate battalions and sent up in the front lines while the white folks fought behind them and had a less casualty rate? How much pain was caused between 1877 and 1948 to black servicemen and their families? But yeah, nobody alive now could experience slavery, so reparations is stupid. That's what that says to me. How much pain was caused between 1877 and 1948 to black service members and their families? Some of those people are still alive, or their children are still alive, or their grandchildren are still alive. And they weren't slaves, but they were affected differently than the white folks in this country. Next sentence. The U.S. Supreme Court judged school segregation unconstitutional in 1954. Okay, so we were getting a really subpar education between 1877 and 1954. How much pain was caused in the black community between 1877 and 1954 because we were in the second-rate, third-rate, fourth-rate schools? How much pain? How many families didn't get to blossom because of that segregation? But yeah, none of those people would benefit from any sort of reparation. Yeah, those people wouldn't benefit from governing their own lands. Those people wouldn't benefit from a federal system that's similar to the Native American program. Those people wouldn't benefit. That doesn't matter. The United States government adopted civil rights in 1964. Once again, between 1877 and 1964, how much did those Jim Crow laws affect the people that are living now or their descendants? Does maybe 1877 to 1964, is there anybody alive, or is there children alive that were alive during that time? I would argue probably. Okay. The United States government's Voting Rights Act of 1965 guaranteed black access to ballot boxes in the South and beyond. 1965, once again. Between 1877, when the niggas were not allowed to vote anymore, shortly after the Civil War, to 1965, how many black issues were discussed between that time when black people couldn't vote? Zero. I wonder if any of those people were affected by that. I wonder if any of those families were slowed down. Any of their progress was squandered between 1877 and 1965. Probably not. Nope, no reparations for them. The United States government's Great Society war on poverty, racial preference programs, school desegregation decisions, education subsidies, public housing, food stamps, and much more were designed largely to help millions of blacks overcome more than a century of Democrat-enforced discrimination and destitution after slavery ended. Okay, so basically, that's a lie. Okay, the Great War on Poverty was created, and I'm not a historian, but I'm pretty sure it was after the stock market crash in 1929 when the whole country was starving, and now you want to say you made that program for black people. That's just a bunch of bull. Okay, racial preference programs. Okay, so that helps. Take a couple starfish and throw them back into the ocean and let the rest of them drown on the beachhead, and none of those people were affected. None of those other starfish would benefit from reparations or governing their own lands. Okay, that's ridiculous. Okay, public housing and food stamps. That's what you created to help black people. You put a roof over their head in the slums and you feed them trash, or you give them money so that they can go feed their family, but you don't give them a job. You don't let them buy their own property. You don't let them craft their own laws. You don't let them institute their own police force and their own economic structure. No, you don't do that. You just give them a house and some food. Thanks a lot. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I'm talking about. Both sides will sit here and argue because they need us. They need us to get their own political goals accomplished. Go ahead.
Yes, they do. And if I'm hearing you correctly, what I'm hearing you say is, reparations as it's discussed right now and its connection to simply slavery is, like you said, a smokescreen. It's bull, okay? It's not just about slavery. And, some of these super smart individuals with all these degrees and status and making all these policies and things like that, they're smart enough to figure those things out, yet they're dumb enough to they can only connect reparations to slavery. Yes, slavery was the only wrong done to black Americans in the United States. Okay. Yes, that explains why we are at the bottom of all systems. And what I mean by that is when you look at unemployment rates, when you look at home ownership numbers, when you look at graduation rates, when it comes to success, we are at the bottom between us and Native Americans. We are at the bottom. And they, some of them, not all of them, some Native Americans have their own opportunity to govern their own lands. We do not. So back to the point, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that reparations, as it's discussed today, should be about the black experience as a whole, slavery included, but the things that followed up until present day. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The fact that my great-great-great-great-grandfather was a slave isn't necessarily why I started off in life where I started off in life, but how his great-grandchildren were affected between 1877 and 1964 and 1965, and how his children and nephews and nieces and how his businesses and all the different endeavors that he might have participated in between 1877 and 1965, that's impactful. And not to mention the fact that, hey, just because you wrote on a piece of paper that things were going to change didn't mean that they changed in 1965, because they didn't. Okay, just like, if you look at the Civil War, when the North won the Civil War, they had to leave the Union troops in the South for a long period of time in order for all that progress to be made between 1865 and 1877 when the progress was made. But alas, they lost at the ballot box and the Democrats took back control. And so what did the Republicans do? In order to compromise their own political agendas, they just let niggas be unprotected in the South between 1877 and 1965. It went back to worse before slavery was happened, probably. Because now the white folks had no reason to feed any of these people. You weren't my property anymore. Now you're just on your own. So now you'll be lucky to come back here and work for free. What about all the brothers that didn't even get that chance? I wonder how they fed their family. I wonder how they built their family tree. But we're coming to the end. I just want to say this, is that this tool that's being used, this reparations carrot that's being dangled in front of the American people's face, is simply a carrot to get black people to move towards the ballot box to vote for Democrats. And let me tell you what'll happen if everything that the Democrats wanted to come true happened. Let me tell you how that would look, how that does not benefit us. Okay, so they write a check and they cut a check and they give it to people who they figure were the descendants of slaves. Now they've made up for every single thing that they ever did, because they gave 20 grand or 30 grand or whatever to every black citizen in the country. An insignificant amount of money with an insignificant amount of power, no land, and no legal rule over their own future has been distributed, just a couple dollars. And so then when we squander that and spend it at the club, or make a bad investment or buy shoes or whatever it is that we do with our 20, 30 grand, now that we're broke and we've spent it, now the whole country will just be able to say, look, you see, they weren't worth nothing anyway. We gave them some money and look how they wasted it. It'll be another way for them to just further put us down and attack us and think that the only way that they can help us is to house us and feed us, which is what that article just described. Okay? And if they're wrong and the right and the Republicans win, well then we don't deserve anything ever, because slavery was too long ago and none of us participated in it. Either way, we lose. The only way that we can win is to make the argument that, you know what, we're done participating fully in your system that's been rigged against us since the day the first ships landed on these shores. We're done playing your political game. It's time for us to have a slice of this American pie carved out and put on a plate that we can distribute to our own people, that we can learn the recipe to and make more pies so that we can feed ourselves for the future. Don't give me a fish, teach me to fish, and give me the opportunity to fish in the waters where I can catch some damn fish. I don't need you to feed me and house me. This is ridiculous.
I agree. And I think the way that reparations is being discussed is very dangerous. I agree with you that giving cash to people, black Americans who have no civic leverage, no economic leverage, that will be a very short-lived, very temporary, I can't even call that a solution, but a very temporary, short-lived strategy. The true strategy, like you just said, is sovereignty. It's the ability to govern ourselves. And I want to ask this question. Any black Americans that watched today's June 26, 2019, any of you that watched the Democratic debate, were you inspired by any of that? Did you hear anything that really connected with you and made you excited about your future in the United States of America? Because I did not. They were not talking directly to us. They did not say anything. None of the candidates. There's things I like about some of them. But as a collective, they said nothing to inspire me. They avoided the topic of reparations because they don't all view it the same, and they didn't want to do anything to jeopardize their democratic solidarity. So they steered away from that. And you know what? That's okay. Because we need to withdraw our commitment to these cyclical handouts that keep us trapped and keep the ceiling of our American dream lowered. We need to withdraw that and say, you know what? We need the opportunity to govern ourselves, educate ourselves, police ourselves, because we've only yielded losing results, like you said, since the ships with our enslaved ancestors have arrived.
Yeah, man. And so, like I said, man, you're right. And we're on the same page. What I want to say as my closing statement is, open your eyes, America, black Americans, white Americans, Republicans, and Democrats. We have $4 billion that we are trying to pass to put down on the border so that we can give toothbrushes and toothpaste to Guatemalan children who their parents sent to the border on their own, or so we can hoist up a wall and keep a bunch of people out. And we have $125 million to spend on a single drone. And we have $40 to $50 billion a year that we can allocate for foreign aid. And the Democrats want to promise free college education for all Americans, every single one, and free health care and Medicare for all, yet and still discussing black people actually having a slice of the American pie, one of those stars of the 50 turning black, isn't even in the conversation. We got money for all kinds of things except for saying, hey, why don't we give you a fair shake and let you try to figure out how to fix your house yourself? Instead, just keep coming to the ballot box and we'll take care of it for you. Well, that's not how I run my household. I don't need somebody coming in my house and telling me how to feed my family, okay? I want my own house and I'll figure it out on my own. That's what Black American sovereignty is about. Don't get suckered into this political trap.
Facts. And with that, let's leave you with the definition of Black American sovereignty, which is the realization of Black Americans as a sovereign nation governing lands of restitution within the borders of the United States of America. We are Americans. We deserve our American dream too, without the hand of our oppressor continuing to take, rob, and only promise us it'll be better next time. Done with that. Black American sovereignty it is.
Peace.
Peace.
At the very same time that America refused to give the Negro any land, through an act of Congress, our government was giving away millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that it was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor. But not only did they give the land, they built land-grant colleges with government money to teach them how to farm. Not only that, they provided county agents to further their expertise in farming. Not only that, they provided low interest rates in order that they could mechanize their farms. Not only that, today many of these people are receiving millions of dollars in federal subsidies not to farm, and they are the very people telling the black man that he ought to lift himself by his own bootstraps. And this is what we are faced with, and this is the reality. Now, when we come to Washington in this campaign, we are coming to get our check.